Boo! Did I scare you? Halloween week is fast approaching. Week number 9 in the college football season. We'll review week 8, talk trick-or-treat teams, and put together your watch guide.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beater turn into a Bentley. See I'm stunning, so I'm all I'm thinking, please don't tell me.
All right, I'm going to bounce around a little bit here, but that's typical. So Ohio State didn't look great beating Iowa and in covering the 30-point spread, but they did. However, scoring 1 touchdown in the first 5 trips of the game, the first 5 drives, which went inside Iowa's 30, and only scoring 1 touchdown was not a great result there. They did kick it up in the second half a little bit, but they only had 360 yards of offense in the game, finishing with 54 points and a 54-10 win. Only 2.2 yards per carry was pretty miserable. Iowa had 6 turnovers to Ohio State's 2, and only 158 yards of offense for the Hawkeyes, but we already know what a horrific case that's going to be, and you have to wonder if there's going to be a coaching change for the first time in several decades there in Iowa City. It's the Buckeye sleepwalking that was really quite a surprise. Jackson Smith-Njigba was back for the first time in several weeks. I believe it's his first full game of the season, and he caught 1 ball for 7 yards. Fleming had 2 catches for 105 and a touchdown. Ibuka, 6 catches for 8 yards and a touchdown, as this great core continues to have multiple options. Harris Jr., 7 catches for 62 and a touchdown. Not so impressive looking for the Ohio State Buckeyes, despite the 54-10 final score. Let's talk Texas, as I watched a whole lot of this game, Texas and Oklahoma State, and the Texas talk was nauseating going into this game and to start as well. Quentin Ewers immediately came out and threw a terrible interception that Oklahoma State turned into a 3-0 lead early. The crew was defending the bad throw, stating the wide receivers were probably off and we wouldn't see that the rest of the game, foreshadowing, and it was the receiver's fault. The announcing crew immediately started discussing what's been going around the past couple weeks. What would it look like if a 2-loss Texas team was in the playoff conversation because Quentin Ewers didn't play out the 2 games that they had lost on the schedule, and they should be taken into consideration by the playoff committee that their best player, air quotes best player, that we know of at this point, was out for those games. Again, Quentin Ewers only played 3 full games coming into this weekend. He's 19 years old. We're completely ignoring the fact that Texas at this point was 6-6 in their last 12 games, going back to last season where they were 5-7. They didn't look great against Iowa State last week when the Cyclones dropped what could have been a game-winning touchdown in an unforced error. Not to mention in this game, they were playing on the road against a higher-ranked, better-performing team with a better record, in which Steve Sarkisian has a 1-5 record as the Texas head coach in road conference games. Now, the teams traded touchdowns, and Texas had a horrible call. Texas had a call go their way. It was against Oklahoma State. They gave them a ball on the 35-yard line off of what was called a miffed punt on Oklahoma State. Didn't really appear that way, but Texas came away with 0 points out of the possession. Now, through 3 quarters, as this game started to drag on, Quentin Ewers had 14 overthrows as we continued to see bad play throughout the entire game. Overthrows, blame on the receivers for not running right routes, which could be true. We knew this was going to be a windy game because of the weather and the forecast coming in. But through 3 quarters, 14 overthrows, as ESPN threw up, was the most for a Texas quarterback through 10 years, the past 10 years. And that continued into the 4th quarter. Every time you looked, Ewers was sailing a ball into the stands. He finished 19 for 49, 3 picks, 2 touchdowns. He did have 319 yards. Now, Oklahoma State scored 14 straight in the 4th to win 41-34, so they did had to come back and win this game by a touchdown, but they were able to do that. Ewers was not able to pull them ahead. Now, Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson both broke long runs in the ground game to score for Texas in this game, but there wasn't a whole lot going there for a good chunk of the game. Spencer Sanders was 34 for 57 for 391 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick, 43 yards on the ground. Again, not super reliable throwing the football in these big games, but he did okay the other day. The Cowboys defense tallied 13 quarterback hurries, and they could actually still make the Big 12 championship game. Now Texas, 5-3 with road games at Kansas State, home against TCU, at Kansas, which might have a healthy quarterback at that point, and home against Baylor still on the schedule. This team is going to be 8-4 probably. They currently, again, 3 losses, maybe 7-5 down the line, which is about where I projected them preseason. So this national narrative has just got to calm down a little bit. They can be looked at like the 2021 Brooklyn Nets. Yes, they have the potential to win the national championship, but this is why we play the games, right? This team hasn't even been close outside of the Alabama game 6 weeks ago to beating really quality teams and coming away with the wins. You got to close. You got to make big plays. You got to stop the other squads. And Iowa State last week doesn't have a terribly threatening offense. You weren't able to stop them. You weren't able to generate your offense this week and able to put the game away. So just really poor performance despite all these metrics that the national media is putting out. Different sports analysts have them number 7, number 10, way up there. But the on-the-field performance isn't there. You need to throw your metrics away at this point. They're still loaded with enough talent and freshmen and young guys, including Ewers, and a number of offensive linemen and Roshan Johnson at running back, and the young pieces on defense, again, one of the worst passing defenses in the country, that this team could legitimately be a double-digit team, compete for the Big Ten championship and a national championship next year. But we're just not there yet. All right, good Lord. Let's nobody talk about Texas for a while. Well, I'm frustrated, though. Let's tackle the Clemson-Syracuse game. I think I have a full page and a half of notes on just that one alone. And this is going to be discussed as a really good game that went down to the wire. Is Clemson going to be a good team? Is there going to be a quarterback change, which is just garbage? Now, it was exciting football. It was also really bad football. Clemson led 7-0 early, but trailed 21-10 at the half. They had a big fumble on their 10-yard line going in for a score that Syracuse picked up and ran 90 yards for a touchdown. Seemed like a great defensive play, but it was also a precursor to the turnovers and poor play and scoring drives that came off mistakes that happened throughout the rest of the game. Syracuse had 7 possessions in the second half. 6 of them were 6 plays or fewer that ended in punts, including drives of 7 yards, 3 yards, 0 yards, and -4 yards. And the 7th possession was the game-ending interception that we'll talk about in just a second. Now, DJ Ungale was benched for Clemson in the third quarter after his 3rd turnover of the game. He was 13 for 21 for 138 yards, but had 2 picks and that fumble. So we finally get to see 5-star freshman Cade Klubnik step into the game. Now, he finished 2 for 4 for 19 yards passing, so he did very little coming to the ball game. His first drive was extended after a horrible late hit out of bounds penalty on a 3rd down that would have caused them to punt, but instead gave the Tigers a first down that they eventually scored on. So Syracuse ended up with 30 total yards of penalties actually on that drive. They had another hit later on, and that eventually turned into a 5-yard touchdown run by Phil Maffa, the number 2 running back. Next time down the field, Will Shipley ripped off a 50-yard touchdown run. He finished with a career-high 172 yards and 2 touchdowns at 6.4 yards per carry. Maffa actually had 94 yards, a touchdown, 5.2 yards per carry. Now, Cade had his best play of the day, making a nice throw for the 2-point conversion to make the game 24-21. And Clemson kind of took that lead with over 8 minutes to play. So after trading punts back and forth, winding down towards the end of the game, Clemson gets a drive together, heading down towards the red zone, but Syracuse is able to bow up and stop them on 4th and 1 with about 2 minutes to play on the 27-yard line, so field goal range. But Syracuse waited 20 seconds, about 20 seconds there to call a timeout, so the clock ran all the way down to 1:33 to play before the timeout was called. So they didn't preserve the timeout and wait till they had the ball back, and they didn't call the timeout right as the tackle was made for 4th down. They waited until 25% of the clock remaining time was off, 20 seconds, leaving a minute and a half left, and then decided to take a timeout. Just a stupid choice by the coaching staff there. Then Clemson kicked the field goal to go up 6. And 'Cuse had 2 timeouts left, had the first downs to work with, and it was just a really stupid decision. So Syracuse took the field, and Garrett Schrader, the quarterback, is immediately crushed and sacked when his tight end completely misses a block, and the quarterback just gets lit up. Horrible decision there. Tight end, that whole offense couldn't do anything in the second half, and the tight end, on a big drive that can still win the game, whiffs on the first play. Then we go through a 5-minute review, trying to determine on the next play if his receiver caught a pass on the sideline or not, which it clearly looks like he does. Thankfully, the referees get that right, give him the catch, we're able to proceed. Not sure what the refs were doing with that, looking at that one for so long. And there were terrible calls all throughout this game, including a big hit on Syracuse on a 3rd down that was not called, which would have given them a first down and continue to drive at one point in the second half. This was the possession after Clemson was granted the first down, and their drive was sustained by a late hit out of bounds on a 3rd down play. Very blatant hit on Schrader, the Syracuse quarterback. And again, that play was not called, should have been, and it was not too long earlier the other way. So the Orangemen make a couple of really great catches, really great plays, make it down into game-tying field goal range, but still have time to make a couple more plays to try and get in the end zone and win the game. All they have to do is not take a sack, not get a turnover, and they'll still be in position to kick a game-tying field goal to send the game into overtime. The problem is that Garrett Schrader, the 'Cuse quarterback, throws the ball right into linebacker R.J. Mickens' hands, the dropping linebacker in the zone coverage, who doesn't even have to take a full step to his left to go up and get the football. It's basically an advantage for him versus the wide receiver. He's facing the quarterback, dropping back into coverage, simply slides, sidesteps to his left, goes up and grabs the ball. If he hadn't moved and he just stuck up his left hand, he still probably would have grabbed the football. It was a horrible throw, a horrible read by Schrader, who again already had overtime basically lined up if they didn't get another yard. So terrible quarterback decision, and that was it for Syracuse. They now have a loss, and they could still win 10 games this year, but man, they really let Clemson off the hook here. So the questions are going to be, can Clemson go undefeated, and is it going to be with Cade? When really, the autopsy out of this game is, are you lucky to get out of a game with a -3 turnover margin, 160 yards more offense? You were way ahead in this game in that category. There's questionable officiating, unforced errors both ways that could have easily lost you, or at least forced the game into overtime. Or are you talented enough that you just survived a pretty awful performance in set of circumstances? It just can't happen again. Keep in mind, this was in Death Valley. This was Clemson's place. It wasn't a night game, and that sure makes a difference. It sure makes a difference playing a nooner there than a night game. Now you can credit the defense, but when Syracuse needed some plays, they were able to make it work. Now Sean Tucker only had 5 carries the whole game. I have no idea why Syracuse went away from him. He had 54 yards on his 5 carries. That was stupid. It's not great coaching on that particular case. Same with the timeout calling. Now the Tigers had 5 sacks, held Syracuse to less than 300 yards total. But again, the Orange did have a couple big plays in the last 7-play drive that eventually put them in good field goal position before that last interception. I expect to see DJ in 2 weeks. They are going into bye next week, unless Dabo just wants to swap quarterbacks, but you saw nothing in this game really that showed that Cade would be in a better position to lead this team right now. And you can't trust Clemson to pull away from anyone with a pulse. So I think you go with the guy that has a little bit more veteran presence right now. Cade, though, looks like he can be a little bit more elusive, so maybe when he does take the starting position, not necessarily next year. If DJ uses his last year of eligibility, maybe another offseason will help him, though, but maybe we'll see Cade next year. We'll see. But he's not quite ready yet. This isn't Trevor Lawrence taking over for the incumbent right now mid-season. The quarterback he took over for Clemson a few years back eludes me. But this isn't Trevor Lawrence just sneaking in as a true freshman and taking over the quarterback job. Kelly Bryant, man, that was going to haunt me. He finished up his career at Missouri for a season after Trevor Lawrence took his starting position at Clemson. He went undrafted in 2020 in the NFL draft. Currently plays for the fan-controlled league, the Zappers. The remaining schedule for Clemson at Notre Dame, and they wrap up with 3 straight home games against Louisville, Miami, and a feisty South Carolina team to end the season. The afternoon on Saturday was pretty ugly. That was supposed to be the most loaded group of games on the entire week, and it was just a blowout fest. LSU moved to 6-2 by outscoring undefeated number 7 Ole Miss 28-0 in the second half as they rolled them 45-20 in the game. Ole Miss led 20-17 at the half and was crushed in the second half there. Number 10 Oregon gave an unpleasant welcome to number 9 UCLA and walloped the Bruins 45-30. So that was not quite what we expected there. Tulane moved to 7-1 by rolling over Memphis 38-28. Notre Dame took care of UNLV 44-21. Texas Tech had no problems with West Virginia 48-10. Liberty moved to 7-1 by annihilating BYU 41-14. The Cougars scored 2 touchdowns in the first quarter and didn't move the ball again. They're now 4-4. You wouldn't have thought that these records would be what they are. Perhaps the reverse at this point in the season. BYU 7-1 and Liberty 4-4, but that's an impressive job by Hugh Freeze there. Wisconsin shows some fight and dumps Purdue 35-24. The game wasn't even that close. So let's touch on these a little bit deeper for just a moment here. So Ole Miss is one of the top came into the game against LSU as one of the top running teams in the country, and they were held to 117 yards on the ground. Jackson Dart was 19 for 34 passing for 283 and an interception, as LSU was able to completely flatten that team in the second half. Meanwhile, Jaden Daniels had another great game at quarterback for the Tigers, 21 for 28 for 248 and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 121 yards and 3 more on the ground, as he's looking like a really good quarterback that we expected him to be at Arizona State, but that obviously didn't pan out. 500 yards of offense for LSU. Ole Miss still had 400. It just came in the first half. And the Tigers, 6 for 11 on third downs. 5.3 per rush wasn't particularly exciting. 8.9 per pass. And 18 combined penalties in this game really caused some problems, particularly for Ole Miss. And again, just a tale of 2 halves here. And that was a popular theme running throughout the day. Now, Oregon and UCLA. I would like to read you the drive log for the Ducks here. Field goal, touchdown, 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 touchdown. Punt with 6 minutes left in the game. UCLA settled for 3 field goals and had an interception on 4 of its 7. 3 of them converted to touchdowns, and that was the difference in the ball game. Oregon finished with 545 yards of offense. They converted all 3 of the 4th downs that they went for. They completed 50% on third down and had 31 first downs. UCLA was also 6 for 12 on third down, 2 for 3 on fourth, 448 yards, about a 100-yard discrepancy there, 26 firsts. So this was very much a back and forth, but Oregon was able to get into the end zone and UCLA was not. Over 10 yards per pass for Oregon. UCLA did have more on the ground, but still we're talking 5.7 yards per carry and 6.2 yards per carry. Only 1 turnover in the whole game, and that was the interception by UCLA. And a lot of points, but again, the difference was getting into the end zone for the Oregon Ducks, who just could not be stopped. Now there's a stat here tweeted. Again, I've been very much a Bo Nix skeptic, as you would have to be, as he's made a number of questionable decisions throughout his entire career, and at times here in his brief 7-game career here at Oregon. Per Matt Zenitz, Bo Nix numbers from Oregon's last 6 games: 25 total touchdowns and 1 interception, 5 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions in each of Oregon's 2 top 15 wins, and 357 yards of total offense per game in Oregon's 4 conference games. So the Ducks are real, and they're competing in the Pac-12 championship if they keep this course. Now, UCLA is not out of it. Both teams are 6-1. No divisions this year, although they're continuing in that structure right now. It's going to be the best 2 teams, though. Best 2 records will go to the Pac-12 championship game. So Oregon, UCLA, Utah, and USC all have just 1 loss in the Pac-12 conference and still have a shot at making it to the conference game. Tulane returned a punt against Memphis, intercepted the ball twice, recovered a fumble, so 4 total turnovers, and took a 35-0 lead at the half. And on the back end, Memphis in the second half outscored them 28-3 and actually outgained them in all offensive statistical categories. But that's how Tulane is going to win ball games, more on the defense. And Memphis has now lost 4 games in a row. They're more on the offensive side of the football. They've lost 3 games in a row to Houston by a point, at East Carolina by 2, and at Tulane by 10, with a -4 turnover margin in that football game. If you only saw the final score, 30-6 of Mississippi State and Alabama, it didn't go down exactly how you would have expected. The Tide only played slightly better than Mississippi State. MSU knew it was going to be a fight early. They were 3 for 6 on 4th downs, including a turnover on downs on the second drive of the game. They actually outgained Alabama 293-290 because the Tide weren't very good either. They had 1.1 yards per carry and 3.8 yards per pass and 2.4 yards per carry for MSU, along with 10 penalties. But the Tide, only 3 penalties for them. So Saban's doing a little bit of coaching up on that side, at least. There was an 11-minute stretch from the first quarter into the second quarter where touchdowns were scored on 3 straight possessions of 6 plays, 3 plays, and 4 plays for the Tide, after 2 turnovers on downs and a missed field goal by the Bulldogs. And that was the entire football game. That was 21 of the Tide's 30 points. It was all field goals outside of that, other than MSU running in a touchdown as time expired to prevent the shutout. Kind of reminds me of that meme or GIF that's going around of the fuck around and find out graph. Well, MSU fucked around early and found out after going for it twice on 4th down and missing a field goal, and Alabama immediately made them pay for it. But 21 of the 36 points came right there. Alabama mixed in 3 field goals, and MSU scores a late touchdown in garbage time. Other than that, it was not a very good football game at all, but Alabama managed to hang in there. They've got to continue to get better, or they're not going to have a good ending to the season. And Kansas State TCU was the big evening slate game that was really a coin flipper as to what the outcome would be. And this was another one where the halves were completely different, mostly because Adrian Martinez was hurt and went out early in this one. But Kansas State led 28-17 early, and another Horned Frogs rally, 21 unanswered in the second half to win 38-28. But Kansas State was still in this one later on. Now, Will Howard stepped in for the Wildcats. Martinez was 1 for 2 passing for 7 yards and had 1 carry for 19 before he went out. Will Howard was 13 for 20 for 225 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. He also ran for 9 carries for 31 yards and a touchdown, as he was able to continue threatening from the quarterback position with that ground game assault on TCU's defense, and not pull away from what they were trying to do on the offensive side of things. He did miss a touchdown pass to an open receiver late in the fourth quarter that could have potentially moved Kansas State in front at that particular time. That was a terrible play. He did also go out of the game briefly when he was banged up, and Rubley, the third stringer, came in and promptly threw an interception. So that certainly didn't hurt the Wildcats and moved in TCU's favor. But overall, just a tough game with all the quarterbacks going out for Kansas State. But this is like the third game this season where TCU has played a team where the quarterback's been banged up. They played Kansas with Jalen Daniels hurt, Oklahoma State, where Spencer Sanders was a little banged up with his shoulder last week, and now Kansas State all teams that they escaped. Kansas by 7 on the road, Oklahoma State by field goal or 3 points, a touchdown difference in overtime last week, and now Kansas by 10. That was a really narrow game as well. But the Horned Frogs, the only undefeated team in the Big 12, keep moving on. Max Duggar, 17 for 26, 280 and 3 touchdowns. Miller on the ground, 29 carries for 153 and 2 touchdowns. TCU's schedule now, as difficult as the Big 12 is week in and week out, is not as terrible as it could be. They have a road game at West Virginia coming up, then they're home against Texas Tech, then they're at Texas, at Baylor, and home against Iowa State. Arguably, this is the bottom half of the Big 12, as things will probably settle out. 3 of the 5, obviously, on the road. Texas Tech still feisty, Texas still feisty, and none of these teams are walkovers. But they now have Oklahoma State out of the way. Jalen Daniels, if he returns for Kansas, would still be a good team. Oklahoma might be picking it up, so I'm not sure if this is the worst schedule, certainly not the easiest, but they have a pathway to potentially still make the playoffs and certainly make it to the big conference championship game right now. Penn State rolled Minnesota in a whiteout. The final there was 45-17. The game really wasn't that close at all. Sean Clifford had 4 touchdown passes for Penn State, 295 yards. He was 23 for 31. Great job there. Nick Singleton only had 13 carries for 79 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Allen back there had 15 for 77 yards. A couple of good backs for the Penn State Nittany Lions. In Minnesota, again, no Tanner Morgan. He did not play. The backup there, whose name I can't pronounce, Kalamanis, 9 for 22 for 175, a touchdown and a pick. And they were able to shut down Mo Abraham. 30 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown, and it was about what we expected from Minnesota. Offensive production that Penn State had was not quite what we projected, what would have been expected here. 45 points and 4 touchdowns, but they were 5 for 11 on 3rd down and just did a good job moving the football. 9.2 yards per pass attempt, and they just looked like they knew what they were doing, probably partially because of the home crowd there, and just a great job. But I think they do what Minnesota likes to do just better, and that just was apparent in this game, even though Minnesota not having a good quarterback was clearly part of the problem as well. So your new AP Top 25, not a whole lot changing at the tippy top. Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, Michigan, Clemson, Alabama are your top 6, followed by TCU, Oregon, Oklahoma State, and USC rounding out the top 10, each moving up a few spots with some of the upsets. Wake Forest, it tied with 10 for the 10 spot with USC. They'll effectively be 11, I believe. UCLA fell to 12, only 3 spot drop there. Then Penn State, Utah. Ole Miss is at number 15, dropping 8 spots, followed by Syracuse, Illinois. LSU stays at number 18. LSU is at 18, making it into the rankings. Kentucky is at 19, staying the same, followed by Cincinnati, North Carolina, Kansas State, who dropped 5 spots, Tulane, NC State, and South Carolina being ranked for the first time after a big win over Texas A&M that we'll cover in the watch guide coming up. Other teams receiving votes, Texas, for some reason, is effectively number 26 in the country after 3 losses now. I've discussed that already. Liberty is effectively number 27, now that they're a 1-loss team at 7-1 and had a decent win. Oregon State still only 2 losses. Mississippi State, 3 losses now. Maryland won a big game, decent game over Rutgers, in which they had to come back. No Tulia Tagovailoa in that ball game. Troy has only 2 losses in a good Sun Belt conference. And UTSA, Washington, Florida State, and Arkansas each receiving 1 vote. The only teams dropping out, Texas, who was 20th, and Mississippi State, who was ranked 24th. Maryland beat Northwestern, had to come back to beat Northwestern, who's still the only team that hasn't won in the United States yet this season. But again, several teams that aren't quite right in here. Tulane is 1 spot below Kansas State, yet Kansas State has 2 losses, Tulane has 1. We can debate whether or not a Power 5 team with 1 more loss should be ahead of a non-Power 5 team or not. But Tulane straight out beat Kansas State, so that is just not right. And, we can discuss Syracuse, Illinois, LSU, Kentucky, a bunch of those. But again, just some terrible rankings here. Oregon State should probably be back in at this point. South Carolina, I'm not sure should be in there at all. But that's your top 25 for right now.
Trick or treat! Beat it, weirdos. I don't do Halloween.
You're supposed to give us candy.
I got your candy right here.
And on that note, I thought for Halloween we'd take a look at a few teams and try to determine if their start so far has truly been a treat and they'll finish the season strong, or a bit of a trick and they will fade down the stretch. So let's start with number 15, Ole Miss. Now let's not forget the Rebels finished 10-3 and number 11 last season and could have gone 11-2 possibly had Matt Corral not gotten hurt in the first quarter of their bowl game. So they were really good last season. This year we weren't sure what was going to happen with Jackson Dart transferring in at quarterback from USC, other than the Rebels would be favorites with the schedule easy and pretty soft early on. 5 of the first 7 were at home: Troy, Central Arkansas, at Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Kentucky, at Vanderbilt, Auburn. Other than Kentucky, which was a preseason toss-up, were projected to be wins, with Georgia Tech and Auburn struggling, and that's all proven out to be true so far. Now, they beat the Wildcats 22-19, although folks like myself will note unforced Kentucky errors and a banged-up Will Levis really hurt Kentucky's ability to tie or win that game late. But that leads to another issue. Ole Miss only scored 3 points in the second half of that game in a 22-19 win. They only scored 7 in the second half of a 28-10 Troy win, 0 in the second half of a 34-27 Tulsa win, 0 in the second half of a 45-20 LSU loss. They often disappear in the second half of games. The most important part of Ole Miss's offense is how effective they can be at running the ball, at 5.5 yards per carry, tied for 14th in the country, and 3rd in rushing yards. They're number 1 in rushing touchdowns with 26. Zach Evans looks like he'll be one of the top NFL backs taken in the NFL draft in 2023. He's averaging 6.1 yards per carry, and even he's been pushed aside by freshman Quinton Judkins, who's even better, 5.7 yards per carry on 47% higher volume with 12 touchdowns on the season. He'll be a top back taken in 2025. Now, the passing attempts are way down from last season with Matt Corral, and true sophomore Jackson Dart is only completing 60% as a true sophomore. It's a bit of a struggle. The line is solid, but the defense is outside the top 35 in pretty much all statistical categories, and that causes stress in the offense when the team just can't run the ball down the opponent's throat. Now, the rest of the schedule for Ole Miss is at 3-4 Texas A&M, home against Alabama, at 4-3 Arkansas, at home against 5-3 Mississippi State for the Egg Bowl. A bunch of teams hovering around 500 outside Alabama. Now, the good news is that the SEC West is kind of falling apart, and every team has holes, so a 10-win season, which should be considered a success, is certainly still in sight. The Aggies are struggling, period. Alabama will be difficult, but the Rebels should be able to have some success against the Tide front. Arkansas will be a great coin flip game if everyone is healthy there, and who really knows in the Egg Bowl, that could go the same way. So this team could go 3-1 or 1-3 down the stretch. I consider them a trick. They can still compete for the SEC. You could say that at least. I'll be watching the games, but the model for continued success just isn't really sustainable. It's just not there right now. How can your offense disappear in the second half of games when teams are making adjustments at halftime? How can that happen? You don't have great quarterback play right now, and the defense just isn't really making it happen. And you can't play close games against Tulsa and some of these other schools. The Troy game wasn't as big either, so just can't be doing that. So I've got Ole Miss as a trick. Next, let's talk LSU. 6-2 overall, 4-1 in the SEC West. This is a dangerous football team. They were projected to finish anywhere from 2nd to 7th in the division in the preseason because of the unknown with Brian Kelly, some disruption from Ed Orgeron leaving the school, transfer quarterback Jaden Daniels from Arizona State coming in, but clearly not really a winning quarterback, and not even winning the quarterback job for sure. Now that we're in the season and Daniels had settled in, this team seems to have a high ceiling. The defensive line, led by B.J. Ojari and Jacqueline Arroy, can be disruptive. They'll be going to the NFL soon. The offense is really centered around Daniels' ability to scramble early on. He's got Keyshawn Boutte back on board after the first game of the year against Florida State, of which he was upset that he wasn't receiving targets and deleted all the LSU stuff from his social media, and that went around for a news cycle. But he's now thrown for 300 yards in 2 of his past 3 games. He's completing almost 70%, 69.9% of his passes for 12 touchdowns and 1 interception. He's the team's leading rusher as well, 524 yards and 9 touchdowns. They're second in the country in fumbles recovered, I believe, at 14. The defense isn't awesome. Obviously, they don't have much of a run game, but I think things are starting to trend up. This is clearly a team that's starting to build as the year continues to move forward. Now, they lost that heartbreaking game against Florida State in the opener, and they lost 40-13 to Tennessee, but outscored Florida 45-35 on the road. They beat Ole Miss 45-20. Those are the last 2 games. They also beat Mississippi State early in the year 31-16. They're in a bye this week, and then they'll host Alabama in a night game a week and a half down the road here. Then they'll play at Arkansas, host UAB, and finish at Texas A&M. Even if they split, it'll be an 8-4 record and a solid season, but they'll be in every single game. I think they can go 3-1, and it's just going to be, I think, a treat watching them from here on out. Jaden Daniels, again, just a dazzling quarterback. It is tough when you don't have... It's really astounding when a team doesn't have a really good running back, and you see a team like Texas that has a couple, Ole Miss that has a couple. Some of these teams just stack running back talent, and there's a whole lot of them. You know, half the college teams have multiple running backs, and then there's just a handful that can't put one guy on the field to carry the ball 4 yards, it seems like. And right now, LSU is one of them. So if Jaden Daniels goes down, maybe they have some problems. Again, one of their quarterbacks just retired when he lost the quarterback battle in the spring. But right now, this is a fun team to watch with some big games on the schedule. And this is one you can clearly see improvements going on throughout the year. Buy-in into the program. They have multiple receivers, including Malik Neighbors, Jaree Jenkins, and Brian Thomas alongside Butte. A lot of threats here. Dangerous quarterback. The front could be more threatening as well. Coming out of the bye week, kind of planning some stuff up for Alabama specifically. Very dangerous football team. I consider LSU a real treat this season. Illinois, 6-1, 3-1 in the Big Ten out of the West Division. If they can beat Nebraska this weekend, Purdue is the only team left that can really catch them in the Big Ten West race, so they'll probably be in the Big Ten championship game. The defense has been the storyline all season. They're tops in the country in total defense, number 1 right now, tops in sacks, yards per play, interior pressure, completion percentage allowed. Again, top 5, top 10 at least in a lot of those categories. So who have they played is the question. Well, they haven't played a top 40 offense. They played Wyoming, Indiana, Virginia, Chattanooga, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. And there are only 2 teams left on the schedule, Michigan and Purdue, that are going to be up there as far as offensive talent. That doesn't mean this team can't sustain what they've been doing. They have a good running back in Chase Brown, averaging 5.5 yards per carry and over 1,000 yards on the season. On the offensive end, Tommy DeVito is completing 70% of his passes for 10 touchdowns and 2 picks, the transfer from Syracuse. They should be able to move the ball on the remaining defenses on the schedule for the most part. At Nebraska, home against Michigan State, home against Purdue, at Michigan, at Northwestern. Of course, Michigan, possibly Purdue being the exceptions there. The slugfest in the Big Ten, all those battles aren't necessarily exciting, but this team is one of the few in the Big Ten West not getting any hype in the preseason, with Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Purdue all getting buzz. So this team is a nice treat that should again be on pace to win the West. But they have a big game against Northwestern this week, and I think, again, this team should win no fewer than 9 games, and I'm actually really interested to see how they fare against Michigan. That'll be in Ann Arbor, so a tough road environment there, but they play November 5th. I'll be interested to see if they're able to lay any kind of threat there on the defensive end, if they're able to slow Michigan down, because it's possible, if Michigan's in turn able to beat Ohio State, that those teams could rematch in just a few weeks after that in the championship game. I consider Illinois a treat. North Carolina. The Tar Heels have the number 8 offense, averaging 41.7 points per game. Drake May might be the best quarterback in college football. That's a little tongue-in-cheek. Top 5? You have to name 5 quarterbacks better than Drake May. I'm not sure there are 5 if you watch North Carolina. He's 15th in completion percentage at 70.1%. He's second in touchdown passes with 24 and only 3 interceptions. He's thrown for 280 yards plus in every single game. He's third in quarterback rating, whatever that means anymore. He's 5th on yards per pass attempt. He's actually the team's leading rusher as well with 378 yards. Again, we're talking mostly about teams here that can only run the ball or only pass the ball. Josh Downs is the top receiver, but there are a lot of guys. 8 guys have 10-plus catches. 8 guys are averaging 10-plus yards per catch. 3, 20-plus yards per catch. North Carolina is top 8 in plays of 20-plus yards, top 8 in plays of 30-plus yards, top 8 in plays of 40-plus yards, and top 8 in plays of 50-plus yards. So this is what you would call an explosive offense. The team won road games at Appalachian State by 2 at the beginning of the year, if you remember. Georgia State by 7, a game that was way too close for comfort, and they beat Miami and Duke by 3 each. Teams you're not exactly frightened of, and lost to Notre Dame by 13 at home. 4 of those teams actually outgained them in total yardage, despite only picking up 1 loss. So this team is Drake May, pulling her ass out of the fire every single week. The rest of the schedule: home against Pittsburgh, at Virginia, at Wake Forest, home against Georgia Tech, home against NC State with no quarterback. Now, Wake Forest is the only team that has an offense here, but everyone else is hanging points on UNC regardless of how their regular offensive performance is, and it isn't getting any better. They have a good cornerback there in Tony Grimes, but there's still a lot of problems. They're playing with a converted quarterback to middle linebacker last season, and he was all conference. I believe Mac Brown is doing a good job recruiting. His classes have been solid, but the defensive side of the ball has really been lacking in performance. Now, Wake Forest, again, could freely drop 60 points on UNC, but the Tar Heels could turn around and do the same to the Demon Deacons and win that football game. So this team is a little trick-or-treat every weekend. They could beat every team on their schedule, and vice versa. Those teams could really put some points on the back end of North Carolina's defense. They could still win a horrible Coastal Division, even if they take a loss. They're 3-0 in conference play, and Duke and Georgia Tech are both 2-2. So they're a game and a half back, and North Carolina already beat Duke, so they own a tiebreaker. So this team could still go 2-3 down the stretch and play in the ACC championship game. By my math, I don't think they'll be that bad. I think they'll be a little better. I think Drake May is really exciting to watch, and I think it would be really interesting to see this team play Clemson in the ACC championship game, because I don't know if the Tigers can put up that many points. This is a treat. Despite the fact that it's a quarterback versus the world out there, this is a fun team that could still win 10 football games. How wild is that? This just shows you how good the quarterback position is, how important it is, and how good they have it there right now. Kansas State is my next team, sitting at 5-2, or are they 6-2 now? 2 losses and still in the Big 12 race. Now, coming into the preseason, the Big 12 was a big question mark. Last year's top 2 teams, Oklahoma State and Baylor, figured to be in the mix again, but so did the Oklahoma Sooners, even though they had a new coaching staff, and so did Texas, who was rebuilding things after a 5-7 season. So where did Kansas State and TCU play in? Well, all the talking heads had a pick, one or the other, to kind of break through and either be a dark horse candidate to play in the Big 12 championship game or finish in the top 3. I was in the TCU camp, and they're clearly solid with wins over Oklahoma State and this Kansas State team, even if you were to point out that they were playing banged-up quarterbacks in those games. But let's talk Wildcats and how they got here. Adrian Martinez transferred out of Nebraska to Manhattan, Kansas, and has partnered with Deuce Vaughn, a running back who's had a fantastic career here so far in Manhattan, Kansas. Vaughn has 132 carries so far this season for 744 yards. That's 16th in the country and 5.6 yards per carry, even though Martinez is highlighted as the main guy there. Martinez has 92 carries at 6.1 yards per tote for 565 yards. That's number one in rushing yards for a quarterback, and 9 rushing touchdowns, tied for 14th among all players in rushing touchdowns. He's only completing 62% of his passes for 4 touchdowns and 0 picks. But again, nothing's going on here in the passing game. They're only averaging 7.1 yards per completion when they do complete a pass, and 5.7 yards per carry. They don't do well on third down. The only 2 Power 5 teams with a worse passing offense are Rutgers and Iowa, so that is not good company. The run game is 11th, but that only gets you so far because they're only 30 yards off of Tennessee and 50 yards off of North Carolina, who are able to throw the ball all the time and kind of threaten with both dimensions of that offense. That's why you can't lean into the run and expect big results unless you can also throw the ball. The teams ahead of Kansas State in rushing yards per game with winning records are Michigan, Oregon, Arkansas, Ole Miss, who I've already expressed concerns over, and Air Force, who is number 1 and averaging over 110 more yards per game on the ground and controlling the clock against opponents. On the defensive side, Felix Adoki Ozama is he's got 6.5 sacks this season and 2 forced fumbles. He's a force on defense, and he will be in the NFL probably in the second, third round. And he's great. But the pass defense is outside the top 60. The run defense isn't much better. In saying that, though, the only pass defenses in the Big 12 that are better than Kansas State are Iowa State and Texas Tech. So there's not a big bar to set there in the competition that they have left. They are allowing fewer than 20 points per game, which is great right now. They're scoring less than 30 themselves. They were hanging around and beating both Tulane and TCU, their only losses on the schedule, so that razor-thin margin. And they're also favored at Oklahoma State this week, despite not really being sure who's starting at quarterback. Right now, Martinez is a little interchangeable with the backup Howard. On the other hand, they could have lost to Iowa State and Oklahoma in those games, and they wouldn't be in any conversation right now. They'd have a losing record. The rest of the record is home against Oklahoma State this week, home against Texas, a team that by everyone's metrics is really still a top 15 team. We'll see. At Baylor, at West Virginia, and home against Kansas, which may or may not have a healthy quarterback by then. This team is a trick. Adrian Martinez and Deuce Vaughn are fun to watch. The run game is a threat, but there's just not a whole lot here. A great edge rusher on the defensive end, but this team is looking mighty 8-4-ish. And the last team I want to touch on is the Tulane Green Wave. More importantly, one of the best chances for a non-Power 5 team to make a New Year's 6 game. And that's the question that I want to try and answer here. As we know, our top 2 independents, BYU and Notre Dame, and typically our best shots at making a New Year's 6 game, are not performing up to par as expected this season. Our other non-Power 5 teams with 1 loss, James Madison, Coastal Carolina, are not going to have the strength of schedule to make it all the way up the polls to make a New Year's 6 game. So it's going to come down to good old Cincinnati and Tulane, both sitting at 7-1 to see if a team will make it. So how real is Tulane? I want to talk defense because the offense is okay. Michael Pratt is completing 67.5% of his passes. He has 12 touchdowns, 3 picks. That's fine for a non-power. Solid. He's also the team's second leading rusher, which isn't great. Spears, the starting running back, is averaging less than 5 yards per carry, and they're under 4 yards per carry as a team, although he's got 9 touchdowns on the year, one of the better marks in the country. They have 6 wideouts with 16 to 21 catches, all in that close range, averaging 12-plus yards per catch, and Pratt's 8.9 per throw, which isn't horrible. Now, the defense is 19th, 18th in passing. They're giving up quite a bit on the ground, outside the top 40. They only allow 17.4 points per game, including 17 against Kansas State, the Power 5 team they beat, the only one on the schedule. They're allowing 61% of passes to be completed on them, which isn't a great mark nationally. 6.4 yards per attempt, which is top 30. So they're giving up underneath passes. They're 24th in third down defense, solid. 31st in first down defense, not bad. And the red zone rate isn't one of the best, but teams don't make it there very often. Only 18 times, that's top 20 in the country. They've actually given up fewer red zone touchdowns than most teams. Now, East Carolina was the only top 50 offense they played. They're actually in the top 25. And Tulane smoked them 24-9, held them 50 passing yards, 50 total yards under their average, only allowed 5.5 yards per pass, but 5.7 yards on the ground. Now, Tulane is going to have some issues coming up. Probably not on the road against Tulsa, averaging less than 4 yards per carry, but that is a dangerous football team. They do have UCF, who's going to cram it down their throat. SMU, they'll have a good shot against. They do end the season on the road against Cincinnati, who is a very good back, and Charles McClelland, averaging 6.9 yards per carry. They'll happily put the ball in his belly and let him run it all over the Green Wave. For the sake of this exercise, the Green Wave are a trick. It's unfortunate they will not sustain their great play. I think they'll split their last 4 games, finish 9-3, which is still a great season for them. I don't think that they'll make the American Conference Championship game, and I think Cincinnati will have a shot at making a New Year's Six bowl. That'd be great for the Bearcats, but the Green Wave, I just don't quite think they'll get there. The defense, solid in a number of different metrics, but just has not quite garnered the ability, I think, to finish out the schedule strong against some of the better quality opponents in the conference. And although it'll be a great year overall, I don't think that they'll quite finish out strong. This is a trick. So we got Ole Miss, trick. LSU, treat. Illinois, treat. North Carolina, treat. Kansas State, trick. Tulane, trick. There you go. Just a few teams that are starting to pop on your radar a little bit more as we get towards the end of the season here, certainly into the rankings. There you go. Your trick-or-treat teams. All right, so your Halloween, pre-Halloween watch guide. Of course, you'll be doing all your festivities this weekend with Halloween this upcoming Monday, and you'll get all the cool costumes at the college games when you flick on your TVs. So let's start with Thursday, October 27th. We have a triple header with a great nightcap at 7:30 on ESPN. We have Virginia Tech, who's 2-5. They're heading on the road to NC State. They're a 5-2 ball club. They're ranked 23rd, I believe. I haven't quite updated this since the new AP poll came out. But both teams are coming off of a bye. Well rested, thank goodness. Jack Chambers might be back in for quarterback for the Wolfpack squad here. He can run the ball. Well, we probably won't see a whole lot of throws as long as he can keep it moving on the ground. They've lost 2 of the past 3 at Clemson and at Syracuse, but they won against Florida State 19-17 in the game that Leary went down, but they haven't put a touchdown on the board since he was lost at the quarterback position for the season. Now, Virginia Tech has lost 4 straight coming in, 33-10 to West Virginia, 41-10 at North Carolina, 45-29 at Pitt, 20-14 to Miami. They're putting up less than 20 points per game. Neither team has a quarterback right now is the point. The over-under set at 40. This will be a gross game, your gross Power 5 game of the week. And so let's move on. Louisiana at 4-3 does play at Southern Miss, a 4-3 ball club as well, at 7:30 on ESPN2. Not much to write home about there, but Southern Miss did give Tulane their only loss of the season, so that will be on your television if you wish to watch that. SMU has played an oddly difficult schedule for a team of their level. They lost to Liberty by 2, at Miami 30-7, and at Troy 27-10. Again, they did beat Tulane 27-24 on the road and beat Arkansas State and Texas State by a combined 7 points in their last 2 games. And this team has played several different quarterbacks. I believe they did the same last season, 6 or 7 different guys at the position. And it's just a cluster back there. It is worth noting Frank Gore Jr. is on the squad, and they like to run some trick plays with him passing every once in a while. So, I don't know, maybe something fun will happen over there. The nightcap. Number 14, Utah's 5-2. They're heading to Washington State, the 4-3 Cougs. This is on FS1. Again, a 10 o'clock Thursday game, if you can stay up that late on the East Coast. Washington State has lost 3 of 4. The collapse to Oregon, 44-41. At USC, 30-14. At Oregon State, 20-10 last week was the really bad loss in there. The lone win was 28-9 over a not-so-great Cal team, as it turns out. The Beavers' defense did help Washington State hold them down to 23 rushing yards, and Cam Ward was 25 for 54 passing for 6.4 yards per completion. I think he'll do better against Utah, ironically enough. The Beavs and Utes are within 0.8 of a passing yard allowed per game statistically, but I think Ward will have just a touch more space to pitch the ball around. The Utes are favored by 8 on the road here, coming off a bye that was needed after the UCLA-USC doubleheader that they split. Utah beat Oregon State 42-16 a month ago, so they had much better success. Cam Rising is completing over 68% of his passes with 23 touchdowns total. That ground game, he's good on the ground there. Only 3 picks. This isn't a walkthrough, but the offense for the Cougars is one-dimensional and really has a ceiling. So this is one of the better Power 5 games. Not used to these. One of the better Power 5 weekday games that we've gotten so far, but Utah will probably pull away in the second half. Friday the 28th isn't particularly exciting either. We do have Florida International at 3-4 hosting Louisiana 2-5 on the CBS Sports Network. The Panthers trying to move towards bowl eligibility. It's on the table. East Carolina at 5-3 is heading to BYU. The Cougars there are 4-4 on ESPN2. A little bit more intriguing. East Carolina has lost to the better defenses they've played. Defending my words here. They've played, but averaged over 43 points per game in their wins, including a shocking 34-13 beatdown of UCF last week. They shut down John Rhys Plumlee and the option offense, holding him to 38 yards on 14 carries on the ground there, forcing him to throw it 37 times for 0 touchdowns and 3 picks. Neither defense is very good, but BYU is one of the worst run defenses in the country, and the Pirates will happily sail their ship right into the end zone. BYU is only a field goal favorite right now. This could be an interesting little non-Power 5 Friday night battle. So let's hop into your noon slate for Saturday, October 29th. Your top watches in the noon window. I have one of them on the slate. Number 2, Ohio State at 7-0 was heading to Penn State. The number 13 ranked Nittany Lions are 6-1. This is the big noon Fox game. Now, Penn State was able to get the passing game going against Minnesota last week, and we know the run game has vastly improved from last season, where it was one-dimensional, and Sean Clifford was doing all the heavy lifting for that offense that was ranked into the hundreds in most statistical categories. Efficiency, total run game, the sacks, red zone offense, all kinds of stuff. So much better in that category, particularly with Nick Singleton, the running back there, really picking up the slack. Now, Penn State is going to be the best team the Buckeyes have played so far, and I think the secondary is for real, and the ability to challenge the defense is for real, Ohio State's defense. Penn State's ground game might even be able to lay a blueprint for Michigan later in the season. I don't expect the Nittany Lions to actually win the football game here, and this is one of those atmospheres where it's certainly different playing a noon game than a night game. Ohio State's favored by 15.5. I think Penn State can certainly cover that. C.J. Stroud did play with a bit of a banged up shoulder last week, according to reports, so maybe that's why they had a bit of a problem getting started and converting into touchdowns last week against Iowa and settling for field goals early on in those possessions. But they can't do the same against Penn State. Again, this team, which has looked putrid at times and just really fell apart against Michigan, I think they can move the ball a bit here against Ohio State. Again, the statistics, the numbers, love that this top 10, top 5 Ohio State defense has really improved since last season. It's going to take them right to the national championship. But again, they haven't played an offense that's been really challenging, and Penn State certainly you wouldn't think would be right there either. But they have flashes here and there where they can run the ball and they can throw it a little bit. Sean Clifford can get rolling out of the pocket. We saw how scary that is for a play here and there against Michigan, and I think that they'll have opportunities here against Ohio State, particularly if the Buckeyes start to sputter against the secondary and have to do one of those deals where they're not able to convert into touchdowns on every single play. I think Penn State can at least hang around for a little while. If that one gets out of hand, I have a couple kind of mid-level games here to certainly keep your eye on and to be channel flipping over to. Number 7 TCU is 7-0, one of 7 undefeated teams left in the country. They're going on the road to a team with a losing record, West Virginia. They're 3-4. This is the ESPN game. Now, West Virginia has been suffering through some injuries to the offensive line. In the secondary, their top 2 running backs didn't play in the second half against Texas Tech last week. The tight end, I believe, was banged up. So who's going to be healthy for this game? I don't really know. JT Daniels threw 3 picks against Texas Tech in what was basically a throwaway game in the second half last week, but it was a contest in the first half. They're running out of shots at bowl eligibility now, though, sitting at this 3-4 record. I'm not sure that they'll have the healthy bodies for this game, but TCU's injury luck narrative may continue here, or they may get a bit of a surprise. West Virginia last 3 games have been 18-point losses to Texas, 3-point win against Baylor, then a 38-point loss to Texas Tech last week. So despite the 7.5-point line for TCU on the road, it would be a big upset for the Mountaineers to win. But JT Daniels could still kind of YOLO ball it, throw it every play. Bryce Ford Wheaton and Caden Prather are the top receivers out there. There's a chance that he could just kind of pitch it up out there, and we see one of these crazy games where the offensive line isn't good. Maybe the running backs kind of get out of the equation, and we're just throwing the ball every single play. We know TCU gives up yards. We know TCU gets behind early. We know TCU has to kind of rally late, and West Virginia had an opportunity to win a game early in the season against Pittsburgh and came up just short. They've had an opportunity a couple of games since to kind of throw the way back into it to mixed results. There's a chance that they could do that again. Realistically, even if the Mountaineers are able to keep the turnovers down, I'm not sure how they're able to keep up, but weird things can happen. I believe this is homecoming for the Mountaineers. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. But that's kind of a mid-level flip it over, see what kind of happens. At the same time, number 16 Syracuse is 6-1, coming off the Clemson loss. They are hosting this Notre Dame team who's now 4-3. This is on ABC. It's probably going to be a miserable watch. You don't want to have this on your main television. This is not going to be the game you want to be watching for the entire afternoon. These are the 16th and 30th defenses nationally and 61st and 77th offenses nationally, with Syracuse leading both of those categories. Dino Barber's long-term Syracuse head coach has been criticized for his poor coaching decisions long before they blew the game against Clemson last week due to some questionable decision-making. So we'll see what happens here. Marcus Freeman, of course, the step-in coach for Notre Dame here, of course, in his first season isn't looking so sharp either, so this could be a grindy battle. Hopefully this is a good defensive battle and not just a crappy game with bad offenses and bad coaching decisions and just garbage all over. But this should be a close one. Q's is favored at home by 2.5 with a 47 over-under. So that's what you're looking at there. The rest of the games on the noon slate, and again, some of these could be more entertaining than the ones just previously mentioned if things start to get out of hand or gross. But Arkansas is 4-3. They're heading on the road to play Auburn, who is 3-4 on the SEC network. These teams combined have lost 7 of the past 9 games they've played. RJ Jefferson's been banged up, but will hopefully be healthy and ready to go against Auburn, which has been shockingly feisty. Against Ole Miss, against LSU, the Razorbacks are playing their 3rd straight road game on a brutal stretch, so they're going to be heavily favored on the road here, but Auburn still sticking around, still fighting, still has a head coach right now, so I don't count them out quite yet. And Arkansas just trying to rally, trying to move to 5-3 and continue in the brutal SEC East, I believe. West, SEC West. The toughest Big Ten division is the East, and the toughest SEC division is the West, so the West Division. Now, Iowa State's 3-4. They haven't won a Big 12 game. They're hosting Oklahoma, who's 4-3. This is on FS1, and this is probably going to be, this might actually end up one of the top watches in that noon window. Both teams were on bye last week. Oklahoma, of course, beat Kansas last time out 52-42 after a quick lead thanks to the return of Dylan Gabriel at the quarterback position. Maybe they'll be able to band-aid the defense with some time off, but they've given up 40-plus points to every winning team that they've played, every team with a winning record. Iowa State's defense isn't talked about enough. They've lost 4 straight games, but the defense this season has given up 10 points, 7 points, 10 points, 31 points to Baylor, 14 points to Kansas with Jalen Daniels at the position, 10 points to Kansas State, 24 points to healthy Texas in their games this season. So these teams play very differently. Oklahoma's a 1.5 point favorite on the road, but maybe we'll find something in the middle with not as much scoring and a little bit more defensive grittiness. Not quite sure. Iowa State seems to have a decent quarterback there at the position, but they need to put points on the board. Oklahoma needs to stop them from getting put on their back end. Houston has finally got a winning record. They're 4-3. They're hosting South Florida, who is 1-6. This is a nooner as well on ESPN2, which is strange considering South Florida has 6 losses, but hear me out. South Florida, not good. Lost at home by a solid margin to BYU, East Carolina, and Tulane. But on the road, they lost to Florida and Cincinnati by a combined 7 points. They're on the road again here, so they might have some weird juju there. Houston is 3-1 on the road, 1-2 at home, and Rice was driving late to force overtime in their lone home victory, but threw a pick. So maybe there's some weirdness going on with their home games. Houston suffering a little bit there. Can't seem to get it around for their home battles there. So maybe some weird upset looming here, possibly. 17.5 point favorites are the Cougs. And if this gets out of control, you can turn off ESPN2 altogether. But that will be on your television. Also at noon, worth mentioning the MAC, which has been gross this year. But Eastern Michigan is 5-3. They're hosting Toledo, who is also 5-3. This is on ESPNU. Buffalo scored 24 straight points in the fourth quarter last week to storm back and beat the Toledo Rockets 34-27 last week to remain the lone unbeaten team in the MAC in conference play. But the Rockets will be favored here on the road again this week in a big MAC West matchup. Daquan Finn threw 4 picks last week, but he'll be looking to bounce back. He still had 3 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, and he leads this team in all passing and rushing categories. They ask a lot of him. Eastern isn't anything special, but they will move into first place in the West if they can pull another upset against Toledo. The last game I wanted to fit into the noon slot here was the 12:30 ESPN3 game. Virginia is 3-4. They're hosting Miami, who is 3-4. Now, the Hurricanes lost Tyler Van Dyke to injury last week and had 8 turnovers and a loss to Duke at home, the most by a Power 5 school in 10-plus years. I don't know if Van Dyke will be back again this week. Their 3rd home loss in a row, though, and just atrocious game. Yet they're favored by 3 on the road here. What does that tell you about Virginia? It tells you that Brandon Armstrong, who came into this season as one of the passing leaders and top returning quarterbacks in the country, is having a rough year. He's 65th in passing yards, tied with Dylan Gabriel, who missed 7 quarters of football already this season. He's completing 55% of his passes, has 10 total touchdowns, and 13 turtle turnovers. Well, those are probably better than the turnovers that he's experiencing. Nevertheless, Miami and Virginia on ESPN3. Miami, still a rebuilding program here, and Virginia is there. They're there. That'll be on your television should you wish to experience it. All right, let's hit the afternoon slate. It's a little bit juicier in time order here. Let's first tackle a notable game at 2:30. You have Minnesota hosting Rutgers. Both teams are 4-3 and on the Big Ten Network. Tanner Morgan is still questionable from what I see. I would assume he would clear concussion protocol from what we've seen previously, but maybe not. Either way, Mo Abraham figures to get 30-plus touches again. Rutgers actually has the number 7 defense in the country. I had to double-check that. I still could be wrong, but, I saw number 7. 5 of the top 7 defenses are actually from the Big Ten, and Minnesota isn't one of them. They're number 12. But that's may actually be indicative of how atrocious the Big Ten offenses have been this season rather than how elite the Big Ten defenses have been. But overall, a good defensive conference, I suppose. Rutgers in Minnesota, Big Ten Network, 2:30. So let's get to a big game. Number 22, Kansas State. They're 5-2. They're hosting number 9, Oklahoma State, who is 6-1 on Fox. Again, this could be an eliminator game for the Cowboys should they lose it from possibly the Big 12 conference race, from the playoff race. Big game. Kansas State favored last I checked by a point and a half. Adrian Martinez was hurt last week, and there's no news on his status right now. But Howard played well enough in his absence to almost win the game against TCU last week. They came up just short, so Kansas State almost got a big scalp last week to keep themselves in the playoff and Big 12 race. So they'll have a chance again to grab one. Now, he was injured. Howard was injured himself and returned back to the football game. I assume he'll be ready to go. I guess that's why Kansas State is still favorited in this game. That's got to be an indication of that. Otherwise, Spencer Sanders has had a shoulder injury, so maybe something is going on there. Again, just quarterback injuries all over the place. If Kansas State's down to the third stringer, it's going to be a rough haul because they very much rely on the quarterback running the football and some option plays there. Now, Deuce Vaughn, of course, running back, great job. Only 4 touchdowns on the year, as he's gotten quite a bit of load taken off of him with Adrian Martinez and his success there. But there's a good chance that they just hand the ball right off to him several times. Maybe he'll get 30 touches just to avoid any more quarterbacks getting blasted in this football game. Now, again, both squads are 3-1 in the Big 12. So the loser's pretty much out of the Big 12 race unless we have some craziness happen and we have 2 or 3 loss teams going to the Big 12 championship conference race as we go on for the next few weeks here. But chances are a loser is not going to have a good shot at. But these are 2 good teams with good quarterbacks. Kansas State might have a couple of good quarterbacks with higher stakes, and this is one of the big games on the slate. Also at 3:30, UCF, Central Florida at 5-2, is hosting a ranked Cincinnati team, 20th in the country. They're 6-1. This is on ESPN. Now the Bearcats, we haven't talked about much this season. They've slipped by a few teams, and they haven't played a great quality schedule, losing to Arkansas in the opener, which is a big game of note at the time, and beating Indiana. So right now, they're favored by 1 on the road, and that was after UCF took a bad loss last week, so it's a little surprising. That's not a real strong lean. Now, Ben Bryant isn't any kind of special for Cincinnati at the quarterback position. He's no Desmond Ridder. They had to hold on 29-27 against SMU last week after the Mustangs outscored them 13-0 in the fourth quarter. The Bearcats defense did their thing most of the game, but the offense really had to lean on Charles McClelland at running back and a 6.9 yards per carry on the season, over 8 yards in the past 2 games against South Florida and SMU. Games they won by a combined 6 points, and those teams have a combined 4-10 record. UCF, as a reminder, is 5-2 after taking that bad loss last week. Could have been 6-1. So the question will be, can Cincinnati now shut down the great quarterback option offense? Now, Ivan Pace, their linebacker, is tied for 3rd in the country in sacks. The team is actually 3rd in the country altogether in total sacks with 29. And they're 5th in only allowing opposing quarterbacks to complete 51.3% of their passes. If they can force John Rye Plumlee, the quarterback for UCF, to throw the football, which he did to no success last week against East Carolina, then they'll have a good opportunity to win this football game. I'm kind of surprised the line is only 1 point, but it just shows you not a lot of faith in the Bearcats. As a non-Power 5 team with only 1 loss, it's them or Tulane right now looking like the best shots at a New Year's 6 game. I'm not sure if there's another team right now that has a good shot outside of them. Coastal Carolina, James Madison, one loss each, but man, it's really got to be Cincinnati or Tulane right now. Both teams are in the American Conference, so they would play. They have each other for the last game of the year. So we'll see what happens. Could be interesting in the American. All right, your mid-level watches in the afternoon slate at 3:30. Louisville is up to 4-3 now. They're hosting the 10th ranked Wake Forest Demon Deacons at 6-1. Wow, say that 10 times fast. I hope we see some scary stuff there, some scary birds, some scary trees in the crowd there. That'd be some cool Halloween costumes. Anyway, this is on the ACC network. Wake is only favored by 4 on the road, which seems a little crazy. The last 3 for the Cards was a 34-33 loss to Boston College, where Malik Cunningham went down, 34-17 at Virginia without Cunningham, and 24-10 last week against Pitt in Cunningham's return, in which he didn't play very well and was banged up and hit the bench for a couple plays. Now, Pitt had 4 turnovers and outgained the Cards on offense. They had more first downs and had a better third down conversion rate in a bad offensive game. That was 10-7 Pitt heading into the fourth quarter, but the Cards did win that football game. Now, Wake has been off the radar for a while with a bye week, a 42-10 and 35-15 win over Army and Boston College, respectively, but they won by 10 at Florida State, lost in double overtime to Clemson, and beat what turns out to be a pretty decent Liberty team by a point after the Flame failed to convert on a 2-point conversion, kind of living on the razor's edge. Sam Hartman had 6 touchdowns against Boston College last week. He's only completing 64% of his passes and doesn't have much ground support, but he's got 21 touchdowns and 3 picks. The defense gets stops when it needs to. This could be an ugly game. I'm not sure why Wake is only favored to go in and win by 4 points. I would think 2 to 3 touchdowns, especially if Malik can't stay on the field, but, that's just a strange line. Speaking of strangeness, Nebraska is 3-4. They're hosting Illinois, who is 6-1, I believe, and ranked 17th. This is 3:30 ABC. If the Huskers win, they'll be at the top of the Big Ten West. Who would have thunk it? They beat Indiana by 14, Rutgers by 1, and hung with Purdue last week before losing by 6. That's their last 3 games. They're still bad. They can't do anything on the ground. I think they're averaging like 3 yards per carry the last 3 games, but they're trying to stop from becoming just a pass-happy team, and I think they should just put the ball in Casey Thompson's hands and let him throw 50 times a game. Now, Illinois forces more interior pressures than almost anyone in the country. They have the number 1 defense in the country, only allowing 143 yards per game at 8.9 points per clip, and this could be just a shutdown unless Nebraska pulls a surprise. So that game, maybe keep an eye on that one. Florida is 4-3. They're heading to Georgia, who's ranked number 1, 7-0, CBS, the cocktail party. Georgia is 22.5-point favorites, and I don't think the line is big enough. I remember last year when Anthony Richardson and the Florida Gators had the football in this game, down 3-0 with 2:45 to go before the half, hoping to put together a great touchdown drive with the true freshman quarterback to take a lead on Georgia, or at least tie the game with a field goal, heading into halftime against the top defense in the country. And all of a sudden, with 2:45 to go before the half, instead of going in down 3-0 or possibly taking a lead, they went down 24-0 as the Gators fumbled, threw 2 picks, and allowed Georgia to score 3 more touchdowns with less than 3 minutes to go before the half, and it went from 3-0 to 24-0 in 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and Georgia took a nap in the second half and coasted to a 34-7 victory in one of the most astounding 2.5 minutes of gameplay ever of football to display dominance of one team over another. And this could be another one of those on CBS, which may get a real bummer game here. Florida is 124th in the country in plays run per game. That is not a whole lot and very little wiggle room if you play at that pace. Maybe it means they hang around. I would like to read some red zone numbers to you. Georgia has allowed the fewest red zone possessions in the country, only 10. They've only allowed 3 touchdowns on those possessions. Florida has allowed 32 red zone possessions. That's 119th in the country. They've allowed 26 scores, 18 of them touchdowns, 14 of them on the ground. Again, 32 possessions, 26 scores, 18 touchdowns, 14 on the ground. Georgia, offensively, 43 red zone possessions, leads the country. So leads the country in red zone offense and defense, but 43 offensive possessions in the red zone. 42 have been converted into points, 29 touchdowns, 21 on the ground. So they love to drill in touchdowns on the ground, and Florida loves to give them up. So if this is the game that you're holding your breath for on Saturday, then good luck to you. California and Oregon will be on FS1 at 3:30. Cal is now 3-4. Oregon is number 8, and they're 6-1 in the country. Bo Nix is getting a lot of credit. I read his stats out earlier, but this team is also the 5th rushing offense in the country at 244 yards per game. They're behind the service academies and Ole Miss, which is amazing because they lost their best running back to USC. He transferred over. But Bo Nix is averaging about 80 yards per game, so that certainly contributes. They actually average just 272 passing yards per game, which is like 35th in the country. That's behind Alabama and Stanford, and ahead of San Jose State and Nebraska. So the run game is really opening things up for Bo Nix in that passing attack. Now, Cal didn't look bad to start the season, with losses to Notre Dame on the road by 7, a win against an Arizona team that looked like it was really coming around by 18. Then they were thumped by a middling Washington State team 28-9, lost to Colorado 20-13. You can't do that. They played okay against Washington 28-21 last week, but it was Washington's first road win of the season. The run defense is not bad, but the passing defense is. That would be very Bo Nix of Bo Nix for him to have a funky game just a week after he's been talked about as a possible dark horse Heisman candidate, especially if he's asked to do more in this particular matchup. Now, the line is 17 points. I think it'd be 20 plus if the sportsbooks really thought a lot of this particular offense here and what Bo Nix was doing, but maybe they'll be just fine. Who knows? Cal hasn't played a lot of teams that want to run the ball either. Washington State. So maybe that's an indicator as well. But I do think that they will feel a little bit more resistance in stopping the run here. And Bo Nix will have an opportunity to really put himself in the Heisman race here by throwing for a boatload of touchdowns in the secondary. The last couple games I have of note in the 3:30 spot, Tulsa at 3-4 is hosting SMU at 3-4 on ESPN+. I still think these can be feisty teams in the American Conference that can pull upsets against Cincinnati or Tulane or the other guys that are certainly floating around there as well. I had 3:30 time slot as well. Western Kentucky's 5-3. They're hosting North Texas, who's 4-4. I don't have a network listed for this yet. Western Kentucky's 10-point favorites at home, 68.5 over-under, one of the higher lines over-unders of the day. Both squads are 3-1 in Conference USA. Now, North Texas lost 31-27 at UTSA last week on a touchdown with 15 seconds left. They gave the Roadrunners the go-ahead win. And two good offenses here. Again, two of the better offenses in a feisty Conference USA, so there should be fireworks in that one. And 4 o'clock, I have another kind of middling game. South Carolina is number 25. Somehow they're 5-2. They're hosting Missouri, who is 3-4. This is the SEC Network's game for the afternoon. South Carolina is 5-point favorites at home. Now the Gamecocks are up 17-0 last week on Texas A&M with less than 6 minutes gone off the game clock, thanks to a number of Aggies turnovers and a special team touchdown to open the football game, which shouldn't be a surprise to you guys because I told you. The Gamecocks lead the country in a number of special teams touchdown categories, but the offense for the team is still horrid. The defense isn't much better. A&M is one of 4 teams to have outgamed South Carolina this season en route to their 5-2 record, the biggest win being over Kentucky without Will Levis. I wouldn't be shocked if Missouri, who's put together some good defensive performances this year, was able to pull an upset on the road here against the Gamecocks, who should be excited, but are not there yet as far as being a good team in the SEC. Also at 4 o'clock, Arkansas State's 2-6. They're hosting South Alabama, who's 5-2 on ESPNU. The Jags fell 10-6 to Troy last week, but they're still in the hunt in the Sun Belt Conference. The big evening slate game is going to be at 7 o'clock on ESPN. Number 3, Tennessee, is hosting number 19, Kentucky. The Vols are 7-0. Kentucky's 5-2. Now, I've been down on the Wildcats, but coming in after a bye, this might be the first time all season that we've had a healthy Will Levis at quarterback and Chris Rodriguez at running back at the same time. It's too bad it's on the road at Tennessee, but the Vols might get a bit of a surprise here. The line is 12.5, but I think this is a cover because a healthy Kentucky can be hard to come by, and they're going to have some weapons here on the offensive side of the football and be able to take advantage a bit of Tennessee here. Now, the offensive line hasn't been anything to write home about, but I'm not sure that's been holding Kentucky back as much as we think. Certainly the sacks will set you back behind the sticks. We can't have that, but Will Levis has kind of gotten accustomed to that now, and Rodriguez has still been able to run the football. I'm not sure Tennessee is a squad to put pressure on that line. They've had mixed results this year. Sometimes they're able to really quicken up what the quarterback's doing and credited for a lot of quarterback hurries and some sacks, and sometimes they're able to be neutralized, quite frankly. And that's all I really have to go on here. We know Tennessee is good. The defense has been putting the pieces together. Actually, the 40-13 win over LSU looks really good right now from a few weeks back. They had all the backups in by the third quarter of last week's game against UT Martin in order to get everyone some time. And I always think that's a good benefit. And we'll just see how this ball game goes. But I don't think you can underestimate Kentucky. I think they will stay in this football game. Kentucky was able to minimize a really good quarterback in Will Rogers in Mississippi State earlier in the year. And Tennessee's got Georgia coming up. They don't want to take a loss here. ESPN, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Also at 7 o'clock, I'd like to add a back burner game, a new category, if I may, a back burner game. Number 10, USC is 6-1. They're traveling to Arizona. The Wildcats are 3-4. This is on the Pac-12 network, should you get it. The over-under on this game is 75.5. USC's favored by 15. That pegs the final score around 45-30, much like the UCLA-Oregon game, where basically nobody punted for almost the entire game, which is just wild. Just wild. The game would have to be nonstop scoring to hit the over on this. It might have come down a bit since I checked it on Sunday night. But Arizona is 129th in the country in allowing opponents to complete passes. 129th in opponents' completion percentage, allowing 71.2% of passes to be completed on them, which is absolutely wild. It's shocking that you could win 3 games with that happening. They've lost 3 of their past 4, 49-31 at Cal. They beat Colorado 43-20, lost to Oregon 49-22, lost at Washington 49-39 2 weeks ago. Jaden DeLora, the Washington State transfer there at quarterback, has thrown for over 2,200 yards, 19 touchdowns, 7 picks with a 63% completion rate, so he's not too bad and got some firepower of his own there. He'll need all of it to keep up with the Trojans, but man, if you keep flicking over to this game, it's going to be a touchdown every time you change the channel. This should be a fun one to keep an eye on. Games of note, 7 o'clock, Colorado State 2-5, traveling to Boise State, who's now 5-2. This is on FS1. Boise's now 4-0 in the Mountain West and looks on pace to win the conference at this moment in time. They've won 3 straight and are one of 2 teams to allow less than 50% completion percentage on their defense. Now, Colorado State has played 3 straight games against the worst teams in the Mountain West, and the winner had 17 points each time, ironically. They beat Nevada 17-14, lost to Utah State 17-13, and beat Hawaii 17-13. So, just a weird setup of scores there. But point is, they don't put a lot of points on the board. Boise State's stats there defensively may be a little inflated due to the type of offenses they've been playing in the crappy Mountain West, but they should still roll on the Rams here. Coastal Carolina 6-1. They're traveling to Marshall, who's 4-3. This is on the NFL Network. Marshall's actually favored by 2 points here against the Chanticleers, who are all passing behind Grace and McCall, and the Thundering Herd do not allow that. They've, of course, beaten Notre Dame and James Madison on the road this season. Coastal Carolina might be their next victim. They have the best non-Power 5 back in the country, and Kellen Laybourne with over 1,000 yards, second in the country in rushing, and 12 touchdowns on the season. Really good back there for the Thundering Herd. 7:30, and this is a middling game, the mid-level. Flip over, see what happens. Michigan State's 3-4. They're heading to Ann Arbor to play the number 4 Michigan Wolverines. They're 7-0. This is the ABC game. Now, Michigan is favored by 22 points, and it's rumored that this was pushed for a night game because Michigan wanted to embarrass MSU under the lights after last season's upset. Now, both are coming off of a bye week, so they're all hot and bothered to get this game underway. Michigan State thought it'd be cute and posted about the game on social media with the Michigan M upside down. Michigan socials, in return, thanked MSU for already giving them the W and started selling merch with the upside down block M, stating, "Beat State." MSU has since removed the post. Good idea. Michigan State is allowing 68% of passes to be completed on them, 422 yards per game given up, both ranked somewhere in the 100s. Michigan has 52% of passes given up, top 5 and a top 5 total defense. The offense is skewed somewhat in the same categories. Michigan is top 20, number 8 on the ground. MSU is somewhere past 100. This line probably isn't big enough. Also at 7:30, number 15, Ole Miss is 7-1. They're traveling to College Station to play the 3-4 Texas A&M Aggies. This is on the SEC Network. Ole Miss is behind Air Force, Army, and ahead of Navy for most rushing yards per game. Even though they were shut down by LSU in the second half last week, Texas A&M hasn't shown any indication that they can, on offense, keep up with the Rebels, even though they can only score for about a half per game. Maybe the Aggies have a healthy quarterback room, maybe they don't, but even so, they've played 3 or 4 guys this season in their 7 games so far. Haynes King has been the best among them. They'll probably have the best chance if he is ready to go, but he'll be playing behind an offensive line that's been banged up all year and has officially ruled out 3 starters for the rest of the season. So it'll continue to be the 8-chain train there in College Station as he's been the focal point of the offense. I don't expect a whole lot of resistance there. Ole Miss should win this game, even if it takes a little time to get through what appears to still be a solid defense. A lot of 5 stars accumulated over the past few years for Jimbo on the defensive side of the football, and they'll play very slow. Ole Miss will be happy to accommodate and run the ball and slowly grind this game out. Baylor's 4-3. They're playing Texas Tech on the road, also 4-3. This is also at 7:30. This is on ESPN2. This might be the best game out of this last trio I've talked about. Now, Texas Tech is a 2.5-point favorite on the road. Both teams are 2-2 in the conference. Now, Texas Tech actually leads the country in plays run per game at 96.7. That's 13 more than Oklahoma State, who was second. Even though they've played a couple overtime games, they really like to move up-tempo. Now, Baylor's putting points up on the board, but struggling to make stops. They're 79th in third down conversion rate. This is not the same defensive team that we had last season. They've been in some games where they've really needed points. 36-25 loss to Oklahoma State, 43-40 loss to West Virginia, 35-23 win against Kansas. The defense will be tested against Texas Tech. The defensive metrics have inflated a big win after the Kansas State and Oklahoma State losses on the road, but this isn't that bad of a defense. They could challenge the run, force turnovers, and on offense, they just want to keep going and put the ball in the air. I enjoy watching Texas Tech quite a bit. I'm not sure if Bayhan Moten, the freshman, or Donovan Smith will be starting at quarterback. I'm not sure that it matters. I think Texas Tech will win and cover and look good doing it. At 8 o'clock is another game to keep an eye on. Pittsburgh is 4-3. They're traveling to play North Carolina, who's ranked 21st and 6-1. This is on the ACC network. Now, North Carolina is favored by 3.5 at home here. I discussed the Louisville game and how horrible it was earlier and why I didn't understand why Wake Forest was only a 4-point favorite against Louisville, even though the game was on the road. Well, here's Pitt, the loser of that horrible game between Louisville and the Panthers, and they're on the road. Yet North Carolina is only favored by 3.5. So I don't understand why the sports books are, if they're low on the whole ACC conference, or if they're just low on Wake Forest and North Carolina and think they're not that far off than Louisville and Pitt. I just don't understand the lines here. But Keaton Slavic has been terrible since transferring over from USC. They really rely on Israel Abedika over there in Pittsburgh. He's got 13 touchdowns and will go over 1,000 yards for the year in this game. He's averaging 6.1 yards per carry. Now, 6 of his touchdowns did come against Virginia Tech, where he put up 320 yards on 36 carries, and he had almost as many touches as Slavic did last week, throwing from behind. So it's really his ball game. So we'll see if they can put up some points against North Carolina. We know Drake May will be happy to take advantage of Pittsburgh's defense. The front has been one of the best in the country for the past couple years, the front seven, particularly the defensive line, but it's not quite been as threatening this year. Maybe that's being factored in here, but I think that the Carolina Tar Heels will cover here. And finally, your late night slate. You've been able to go to sleep early, should you choose to do so, the past couple of weeks, and now, I don't know, maybe you have some more interesting games on the slate. At 10:30, number 12, UCLA is 6-1. They're hosting Stanford. The Cardinals were 3-4. This is on ESPN. Now, the Bruins are favored by 16.5, so maybe you can go to bed again early Saturday night in preparation for Halloween on Monday. They haven't been stopped all season, scoring at least 30 points in every game. Now, Stanford only went over 30 points once against Colgate in the opener, and they've only scored 1 touchdown in back-to-back wins now over Notre Dame and Arizona State. They kicked 5 field goals to beat ASU 15-14 last week. Now, I have nothing but my gut, but I do like the Cards. I thought they'd give Notre Dame a little bit of a challenge, and I thought they'd upset someone's apple cart this season. They still have Tanner McGee there. Not much is expected from them. They can do a few things offensively, so I just wouldn't count Stanford completely out of this game. Also at 10:30 on FS1, Fresno State's 3-4. They're hosting 4-3 San Diego State. Both teams have struggled but are 2-1 in the Mountain West. So one will be 3-1 after this game, logically. Fresno's favored by 8.5. The offense just isn't good under Logan Fife there in Fresno, but they've won 2 in a row, 17-10 over San Jose State, 41-9 over New Mexico. Now, SDSU beat Hawaii 16-14 and Nevada 23-7, so this will be another ugly defensive battle, not a whole lot of offense. The over-under is set to 40, and again, one team will have a chance to at least tie in the West Division of the Mountain West with San Jose State. If the Spartans win, they play at 10:30 as well on the CBS Sports Network. Spartans are 4-2. They're hosting Nevada, who is 2-6. So there's a chance that we will see who's tied with the Spartans at the top of the West Division. If the Spartans get upset, then one of those teams will be alone. But just kind of an ugly division there and some battles between division leaders. The 11:59 late game, you're going to get your Hawaii Rainbow Warriors at 2-6, hosting Wyoming, who's 5-3. Wyoming can move to 4-1, a half game behind Boise in the Mountain Division if they win on the island here. And they have some of the worst metrics you've ever seen a team 2 games above 500, possibly 3 games above 500 in some statistical categories. But that's the Mountain West this year, unfortunately. But Stanford, UCLA at 10:30 on ESPN, San Diego State, Fresno State on FS1 at 10:30, and 10:30 Nevada, San Diego State, San Jose State on the CBS Sports Network on the back burner, and 11:59 if you're still awake, Wyoming and Hawaii. That network has not been announced yet. TBD for your island scaries. All right, your top watch guide with a little Halloween fun. So instead of using the traditional categories, let's spice them up a bit with a little Halloween changing here, Halloween themed fun. So instead of your top watches, these are your top houses to hit, top views maybe, top visits, something like that, workshopping. So your top weekday watch, aka the candy corn game of the week, or possibly the Werther's game of the week, the Werther's watch, if you will. 10 o'clock on Thursday, number 14 Utah at Washington State on FS1. I think that's got to be the top game. Will the Utah Utes win on the road and continue to try and stay in the race for the Pac-12 title? They are certainly still there. Washington State, not a walkover team, certainly still a middling group at the moment, but they are going to pose a little bit of a fight there. And Friday, worth noting, is East Carolina at BYU on ESPN2 at 8 o'clock. Worth noting that one as well for your Werther's watch. Now your must-watch game, a.k.a. the king-size candy game of the week, number 18 Kentucky, number 19 Kentucky at number 3 Tennessee. I think this is the must-watch game of the week, although there are certainly other candidates. Actually, if you wanted to roll right through the entire day, you could start with Ohio State, Penn State at noon, roll right to number 9 Oklahoma State at number 22 Kansas State at 3:30, and then roll to the night game, Kentucky at Tennessee. But I would say that's got to be the top watch. Can Tennessee stay undefeated? Will Kentucky fight them a bit? Could Kentucky win? I like that game a lot. That's, again, ESPN, 7 o'clock, the king-size candy bar game. Your audible game of the week, I call this the candy swap game. At noon, number 7 TCU heading to West Virginia, who currently has a losing record. This is on ESPN, though. I think the Horned Frogs have to be careful. I think West Virginia, despite some injuries, could still be a threat. They have been in several games this year. I think that could be a sneaky one for one of the last undefeated teams in the country heading on the road there. And I'd accept USC, Arizona in several of these categories. I think they fit in with all the points expected there if you get the Pac-12 network as well. So the underrated game, I was going to call this the underrated candy game, but now I'm just going to call this the Warhead most underrated candy game. Of course, referring to the package with the guy in his head exploding in a sweet and sour candy that's hard and then melts down in your mouth. So is this game going to be sweet and sour? Are you going to regret it at the end? Is it just going to hurt you? This is Texas Tech hosting Baylor for me. Both teams 4-3. This is the ESPN2 7:30 game. I think it's going to be fun. I think Texas Tech is going to throw a lot. I think either team can really win, and I like the Big 12 this season, but it could go south. So my underrated / warhead game, or for you, insert underrated candy game, I like Baylor and Texas Tech. My check-in game of the week, a.k.a. the Are the Lights On? Is Anyone Home game, and I tried to come up with a clever acronym and didn't quite get there. But for that category, I have number 1 Georgia hosting Florida on CBS. You could also say the Michigan State game in the evening as well. And this is kind of just to see if Florida or Michigan State will be participating in these contests at all, or if Georgia or Michigan will just continue to stay undefeated and roll on through. They're both hosts, so it could get ugly there. But again, the check-in game, just see how it's going, or the Are the Lights On? Is Anyone Home? Can we trick or treat here game? Small screen game of the week, or the bite-size game. At 7 o'clock, Coastal Carolina 6-1, traveling to Marshall, who's 4-3 on the NFL Network. One of the best non-Power 5 quarterbacks on Coastal Carolina's side, and one of the best non-Power 5 running backs on Marshall's side. Should be a good game between a Conference USA team and, they're both Conference USA teams. There we go. A nice Conference USA contest all the way around between two kind of underrated teams in the non-Power 5. Now my late night snack, a.k.a. the sugar high I can't go to sleep game, would be the 10:30 Stanford at number 12 UCLA on ESPN. Maybe the Bruins just blow them out. Maybe it stays a little interesting for a bit. And if you've had way too much candy, or if your child's candy, or whatever you're doing, at 11:59 we have that good old Hawaii game. They're hosting the Wyoming Cowboys. Network TBD there. And that is your pre-Halloween, Halloween weekend slate of games, your watch guide, your trick-or-treat teams. And thank you very much for tuning in enjoy your weekend, and you watches.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a